Story 1. The Bleeding Highway. Marcus Chen had been driving 18-wheelers across the American heartland for 23 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the road could throw at him. Blizzards in Montana, dust storms in Texas, fog so thick in Oregon you couldn't see your own hood ornament. But nothing in those 2 decades prepared him for what happened on Interstate 40 outside of Amarillo in September of 2022. It started normal enough. Marcus was hauling a load of electronics from California to a distribution center in Oklahoma City, running his usual route through the Texas Panhandle. The sun had set an hour earlier, painting the sky that particular shade of purple-black that only exists in the wide-open spaces of West Texas. His CB radio crackled with the usual chatter, truckers warning each other about speed traps and weather conditions. The white lines on the highway reflected his headlights in their familiar rhythm, tick-tick-tick, like a metronome counting down the miles. Marcus noticed the first drop around 10:15 p.m. It appeared in the glow of his headlights, a dark spot on the asphalt that seemed wetter than it should be. He didn't think much of it initially. Could have been oil from a blown engine, transmission fluid, any number of automotive fluids that regularly stained America's highways. But then he saw another drop, and another. They appeared in a trail, leading forward into the darkness ahead of him. The drops became more frequent, appearing every few feet now, glistening in his headlights with a color that made something in Marcus's gut clench. They were too dark to be water, too red to be oil. They looked, for all the world, like blood. Fresh blood, the kind that hasn't started to brown and oxidize yet. The kind that's still wet. Marcus grabbed his CB radio. Anyone got eyes on Interstate 40 eastbound, mile marker 112? Over. Static answered him. Then more static. The usual chatter that had been filling his cab just moments before had gone completely silent. Marcus tried again, switching channels, but every frequency gave him the same dead air. His cell phone mounted on the dashboard showed no signal. 0 bars. That was strange. This stretch of I-40 had decent coverage. He'd driven it hundreds of times. The blood trail grew wider. What had started as occasional drops had become a steady stream. 2 parallel lines that ran down the center of his lane like someone had dragged something bleeding down the highway. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Every instinct told him to slow down, to pull over, to call someone. But who? His phone was dead, his CB was silent, and the nearest town was still 30 miles ahead. He considered turning around, but there was a concrete barrier dividing the eastbound and westbound lanes, and the next crossover was miles behind him. Besides, turning around meant driving back through whatever had left that trail. At least going forward, he was following it, not meeting it head-on. The blood trail thickened. Now it was unmistakable, a river of red running down the highway in front of him, so fresh it seemed to steam in the cool night air. Marcus could see it splashing against his tires, flecks of crimson spraying up onto his windshield. His wipers smeared it across the glass when he tried to clean it, leaving streaks that made it harder to see. Then he saw the footprints. They appeared alongside the blood trail, heading in the same direction he was traveling. Bare feet, human-sized, each print filled with blood that overflowed onto the pavement. Someone was walking out here. Someone was bleeding. Someone was ahead of him on this highway, and they were leaving a trail that suggested they shouldn't be alive, let alone walking. Marcus pressed harder on the gas. Maybe if he caught up, he could help. Maybe there'd been an accident, someone wandering in shock, someone who needed medical attention. His speedometer climbed to 75, 80, 85. The white lines blurred into a solid stripe. The blood trail rushed beneath him like a crimson river, but he never caught up. No matter how fast he drove, the footprint stayed the same distance ahead, always visible in his headlights but never getting closer. It was like chasing the horizon, perpetually out of reach. And the blood just kept flowing, thicker and thicker, until his truck was driving through what looked like inches of it, his tires hydroplaning slightly on the slick surface. That's when Marcus noticed something impossible. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. He'd been driving at high speed for what felt like 20 minutes, burning diesel like crazy, but the needle sat exactly where it had been when he first saw the blood. He checked his odometer. The numbers weren't changing. He was moving, he could feel the engine working, see the scenery passing, but according to his instruments he wasn't going anywhere. Panic started to set in properly now. Marcus took deep breaths, trying to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Faulty instruments, some kind of electrical problem. But he knew trucks, knew his rig better than he knew most people, and everything felt wrong in a way that went beyond mechanical failure. The footprints changed. Where before they'd been walking prints, now they were running prints, longer strides, deeper impressions, toes digging in like whoever was making them had started to sprint. The blood trail became chaotic, splashing wildly across both lanes, handprints appearing on the asphalt like someone had fallen and caught themselves. Then Marcus saw something in the road ahead. A shape. Person-shaped but wrong somehow, the proportions not quite right. It stood in the center of his lane, motionless, facing away from him. The blood trail led directly to it, pooling around its feet in a spreading circle that reflected his headlights like a mirror. Marcus slammed on his brakes. The truck shuddered, air brakes hissing, but the figure didn't get any farther away. It stayed the same distance ahead, as if his truck was braking but not actually slowing down. He could see more details now. It was naked, its back covered in what looked like wounds, deep gashes that wept blood down its legs, forming the trail he'd been following. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, bent too far to one side, like its neck was broken. Then it turned around. Marcus would later struggle to describe what he saw. It had a face, but the features were wrong, shifted, like looking at a reflection in rippling water. Its eyes were holes, empty sockets that somehow still conveyed the impression of staring. Its mouth opened, wider than any human mouth should open, and blood poured out like a faucet, splashing onto the highway in a torrent. The figure raised one arm, pointing directly at Marcus. Its finger extended, longer and longer, impossible, reaching toward his windshield across the impossible distance that separated them. Marcus screamed, jerking the wheel hard to the right. His truck lurched, tires squealing, and suddenly he was off the highway, bouncing across the shoulder, sagebrush scraping against his undercarriage. And just like that, everything snapped back to normal. His CB radio exploded with chatter, multiple voices talking over each other. His phone buzzed with a dozen delayed notifications. His odometer clicked forward, numbers changing. His fuel gauge dropped slightly. The night returned to its normal darkness, his headlights illuminating nothing but empty desert and the damaged shoulder he'd just torn up. Marcus brought his truck to a shuddering stop, his whole body shaking. He sat there for a long moment, breathing hard, waiting for his heart to slow down. Then he grabbed his flashlight and climbed down from the cab, needing to see, needing to confirm. The highway behind him was clean. Dry asphalt, white lines, nothing else. No blood, no footprints. No evidence that anything unusual had happened at all. His tires were clean, no red stains, no crimson splashes on his windshield. It was like the last 20 minutes had been erased, or had never happened at all. But Marcus's hands were shaking, and when he checked his dashcam, there was a gap in the recording. 23 minutes missing, from 10:15 p.m. to 10:38 p.m. Just blank space where the memory card had somehow stopped recording. He got back in his truck and drove to the next town, where he parked at a truck stop and didn't sleep at all that night. He filed a report with his company the next day, claiming equipment malfunction, and requested a different route. They gave it to him without question. Marcus never drove that stretch of Interstate 40 again. He'd hear other truckers talking sometimes on the CB late at night about strange things on that highway. Disappearances, time loss, impossible sightings. But he never joined those conversations. He just changed the channel and keep his eyes on the road ahead, watching for that first dark drop that might appear in his headlights, That might mean he'd somehow found his way back to the bleeding highway. 3 years later, Marcus still drives, but he keeps a small vial of salt on his dashboard, blessed by a priest he found in Santa Fe. He doesn't know if it does anything, but it makes him feel better. And sometimes, late at night when he's alone on empty highways, he swears he can smell it. Copper and iron, the unmistakable scent of blood, carried on the wind that rushes past his window, reminding him that some roads go places that don't appear on any map, and some trails lead to destinations no one should ever reach. Story 2. The Loop. Sarah Morrison had exactly 17 years of experience behind the wheel when she encountered the phenomenon that would make her quit trucking entirely. It happened on a Tuesday in March of 2023, on Highway 93 through Nevada, that long, lonely stretch they call the extraterrestrial highway, because of all the UFO sightings reported there over the years. Sarah didn't believe in UFOs. She believed in diesel engines, delivery schedules, and the reliability of GPS navigation. She was hauling agricultural equipment from Idaho to Arizona, running through the night to avoid the desert heat, her rig loaded with irrigation parts destined for farms outside Phoenix. The highway was empty, as it usually was after midnight, just her headlights and the stars and the endless dark desert stretching out in all directions. She passed a distinctive rock formation at exactly 1:47 a.m. She noticed it because it looked like a giant hand reaching up from the desert floor, fingers splayed against the night sky. Sarah had driven this route maybe 40 times in her career, but she didn't remember seeing that formation before. Still, it was dark and maybe she just never noticed it. She made a mental note and drove on. 15 minutes later, she passed the same rock formation again. Sarah frowned, checking her GPS. According to the display, she was making steady progress south, mile after mile clicking away. But there was that hand-shaped formation again, identical on her right side just like before. She must have been mistaken. Maybe there were two similar formations. The desert played tricks on your eyes sometimes, especially at night. She drove on, watching her odometer, watching the GPS, watching the white lines disappear under her hood. 20 minutes passed. Then she saw it again. The hand-shaped rock in exactly the same position, at exactly the same angle. This time Sarah pulled over, heart starting to pound. She grabbed her phone, opened the map app, watched the blue dot that represented her location. It showed her on Highway 93, moving south, exactly where she should be. But when she looked out her window, she could see the rock formation maybe a quarter-mile back, clearly visible in the ambient starlight. She drove on slower now, paying attention. She passed a mile marker, 78, then 77, then 76. The numbers were descending properly, indicating southbound travel. Everything seemed normal, but then impossibly she passed mile marker 78 again, and then 77, and then 76. Sarah's hands started to shake on the wheel. She was looping. Somehow, impossibly, she was driving the same 3-mile stretch of highway over and over again. Even though her GPS insisted she was making progress, even though her odometer continued to count upward, even though every rational part of her brain screamed that this was impossible. She tried the CB radio. "This is Sarah Morrison, anyone out there? I'm on Highway 93 and I think I'm having some kind of emergency. Can anyone hear me? Over." A voice crackled back almost immediately, clear and strong. "This is Sarah Morrison, anyone out there? I'm on Highway 93 and I think I'm having some kind of emergency. Can anyone hear me? Over." It was her own voice. Her exact words, played back to her with perfect timing, like an echo but not quite. There was something slightly off about it, a flatness to the tone, like someone doing a very good impression rather than a recording. "Who is this?" Sarah demanded, fear creeping into her voice. "Who is this?" the radio replied, with her voice, with her inflection, with her fear. Sarah threw the CB handset down, breathing hard. She checked her phone. No signal, no bars, Just the GPS map showing steady progress south on a highway she was apparently trapped on, driving in circles, going nowhere. She decided to stop. Just stop the truck, get out, assess the situation physically. Maybe there was something wrong with her perception. Maybe she was having some kind of medical episode, a stroke or a seizure that was making her see things wrong. She pulled over, set the parking brake, killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. In 17 years of trucking, Sarah had experienced quiet, but this was different. This wasn't just an absence of sound. It was like sound itself had stopped existing. She couldn't hear wind, couldn't hear the tick of her cooling engine, couldn't hear her own breathing, though she could feel her chest moving. Sarah opened the door and climbed down. Her boots hit the asphalt without making a sound. She walked to the front of her truck, her movements feeling strange, like she was moving through something thicker than air. When she held up her hand in front of her face, it left trailing afterimages, multiple copies of her fingers blurring together. The desert around her looked wrong too. The perspective was off somehow, like a painting done by someone who didn't quite understand three-dimensional space. The rock formation, that hand reaching from the earth, seemed both very close and impossibly far away at the same time. The stars overhead were too bright, too numerous, and they weren't twinkling. They just hung there, fixed and motionless, like someone had punched holes in a black canvas and put lights behind it. Sarah walked back to her truck, moving carefully, feeling like she was in a dream. She climbed into the cab and started the engine, relieved when it rumbled to life normally, providing at least one familiar sensation. She put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, determined to break whatever was happening. She drove fast this time, pushing 75, watching the mile markers blur past. 78, 77, 76, and then impossibly 78 again. She kept driving. 77, 76, 78. The same three markers over and over like a broken record. Her odometer kept climbing though. Her fuel gauge kept dropping. By all mechanical measures she was traveling, but she was going nowhere. After the 20th loop, Sarah noticed something new. There was another truck on the road ahead of her. She could see its tail lights, red dots in the darkness, maybe half a mile ahead. Her heart leaped. Another driver, someone else caught in whatever this was, or maybe someone who could help her. She accelerated, trying to catch up. The other truck maintained its distance. She pushed harder, her speedometer climbing to 80, 85. The other truck stayed ahead, never getting closer, never getting farther. She could see it clearly now in her headlights. It was the same model as hers, same color, same configuration. With growing horror, Sarah realized she could see the license plate. It matched hers. She was following herself. She slammed on the brakes, bringing her truck to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. Ahead, the other truck's brake lights flared red, and it stopped too, perfectly synchronized. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. She was caught in some kind of loop, but it wasn't just spatial. It was temporal too. She was somehow existing in the same space as her own past or future, chasing herself through impossible geometry. She sat there, paralyzed by fear and confusion, trying to think. There had to be a way out. There had to be an explanation. But her rational mind, trained by years of practical trucking experience, had no framework for this. This wasn't mechanical failure. This wasn't GPS error. This was something fundamentally wrong with reality itself. Then she noticed movement in her rearview mirror. Another truck was coming up behind her. Same model, same color, her license plate. It was approaching fast, not slowing down. And Sarah realized with crystal clarity that if it hit her, she would be hitting herself. Past colliding with present or present colliding with future. And she had no idea what would happen when two versions of the same object occupied the same space. She floored the accelerator, her truck lurching forward, tires squealing. In her mirror, the truck behind matched her speed exactly. Ahead, the truck she'd been following pulled away at the same rate. She was sandwiched between two versions of herself, three Sarah Morrisons driving the same highway at the same time, trapped in a loop that seemed determined to collapse in on itself. Mile marker 78 flashed past, then 77, then 76, then a new one, 75. Sarah almost sobbed with relief. She'd broken through somehow, moved beyond the loop. She kept driving, watching the markers descend. 74, 73, 72. The trucks ahead and behind her faded, becoming transparent, then disappearing entirely. The silence broke. She could hear her engine again, hear the wind rushing past, hear the CB radio crackling with distant conversations. Her phone buzzed with returning signal, messages flooding in, dozens of them, all time-stamped from the last 2 hours. 2 hours. She checked her dash clock. It read 3:52 a.m. She'd entered the loop at 1:47. More than 2 hours gone, spent driving 3 miles of highway over and over again. Sarah drove for another hour before she found a town, a tiny cluster of buildings that held an all-night diner. She parked her truck and went inside, her legs shaky, her mind reeling. The waitress took one look at her and brought coffee without being asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost, honey," the woman said, her name tag reading Betty. "I got lost," Sarah managed to say. "On 93. I got really lost." Betty's expression changed, became knowing in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. "The loop," she said quietly. "You got caught in the loop. Happens sometimes out there. Lost a husband to it back in 98. He never came out." Sarah stared at her. "What is it? What causes it?" Betty shrugged. "Government testing, some say. Aliens, others say. Portal to somewhere else. I don't know. I just know that stretch of road is wrong, has been wrong for as long as anyone can remember. Most people who get caught in it escape eventually. Some don't. We find their trucks sometimes, parked on the shoulder, empty, like they just walked away into the desert. But there's never any footprints, never any sign where they went." Sarah left Arizona delivery incomplete. She drove her truck straight back to Idaho, called her company, and quit over the phone. They tried to convince her to stay, offered counseling, suggested vacation time. But Sarah knew she was done. She'd seen something that trucking couldn't prepare you for, encountered something that proved the world was stranger and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. She still has nightmares about the loop, about driving forever through the same 3 miles, chasing herself, being chased by herself, trapped in a moment that repeats endlessly. And sometimes, late at night, she'll check map apps on her phone, zooming in on Highway 93, looking at mile markers 76 through 78. The maps show them normal, sequential, ordinary. But Sarah knows better. She knows that sometimes maps lie. Sometimes roads go in circles. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, you can get caught going around forever, spinning through the same moment of time until the universe decides to let you go, or decides to keep you there, driving into eternity, another ghost on the extraterrestrial highway. Another story told by waitresses in all-night diners to truckers who don't yet know that some routes lead nowhere at all. Story 3. The Vanising Town. Gerald Patterson was 62 years old and had been trucking since before CB radios were mandatory equipment. He'd driven every state except Hawaii, knew every truck stop from Seattle to Miami, could navigate by stars and landmarks when GPS failed. In 40 years behind the wheel, he thought he'd seen everything. Then he drove through a town that didn't exist. It happened in November of 2021, on a regional route through rural Montana. Gerald was hauling timber from a mill outside Missoula to a processing plant near Great Falls, a run he'd made at least 100 times. The route took him through some of the most isolated country in America, long stretches where you might not see another vehicle for an hour, where gas stations were 50 miles apart, where cell service was a pleasant surprise rather than an expectation. He'd left the mill at 4 in the afternoon, planning to make Great Falls by midnight with a stop for dinner somewhere along the way. The November sun set early this far north, darkness falling by 5:30, leaving Gerald driving through a cold, moonless night with nothing but his headlights and the occasional distant farmhouse light to break the darkness. Around 7 p.m., his stomach started growling, reminding him he'd skipped lunch. Gerald started watching for signs of civilization, a diner, a gas station, anything that might serve food. But this particular stretch of highway was especially desolate, nothing but forest and darkness for miles. Then he crested a hill and saw lights below. A town spread out in a valley, streetlights glowing warm and yellow, buildings lit up, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked substantial, maybe 3 or 4 thousand people, with a main street running perpendicular to the highway and side streets branching off in a grid pattern. Gerald felt relieved. He didn't remember a town here, but it had been a few months since his last run through this area, and his memory wasn't what it used to be. Maybe he'd just forgotten. He checked his GPS, but the screen showed him in the middle of nowhere, no town marked, just a stretch of highway surrounded by national forest. GPS glitches weren't uncommon out here, though. Satellite coverage could be spotty in the mountains. He took the exit ramp, a standard interchange that led down to what looked like a county road. A sign at the bottom read, "Welcome to Stillwater, population 3847." The town's name didn't ring any bells, but that didn't mean much. Montana had dozens of small towns, and Gerald couldn't remember all of them. The main street was well lit and clearly prosperous, buildings in good repair, sidewalks clean, streetlights modern. He passed a pharmacy, a hardware store, a clothing boutique, all closed for the evening but looking well maintained. There were cars parked along the street, mostly pickup trucks and sedans, nothing unusual. A few pedestrians walked the sidewalks, bundled against the cold. Gerald spotted a diner halfway down the main street, its neon sign reading Maggie's Place in cheerful blue letters. The parking lot had space for his truck, and through the big windows he could see people inside, eating and talking. Perfect. He parked, killed his engine and climbed down from the cab, his joints protesting after 3 hours of driving. The air was cold, his breath fogging, and he could smell wood smoke and something cooking, maybe hamburgers. Everything seemed completely normal. The diner's door chimed when he entered, a little bell announcing his arrival. The interior was classic Americana, red vinyl booths, a long counter with swivel stools, black and white checkered floor, pictures of vintage cars on the walls. Maybe 15 customers occupied various seats, all dressed normally, all looking like regular small-town Montana folks. A waitress behind the counter smiled at him. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," she called out. "I'll be right with you." Gerald slid into a booth near the window where he could keep an eye on his truck. The waitress brought him a menu and a glass of water, her name tag reading Carla. "What brings you through Stillwater?" she asked, friendly and casual. "Just passing through," Gerald said. "Hauling timber up to Great Falls. Thought I'd grab some dinner." "Well, you came to the right place. Maggie makes the best meatloaf in 3 counties. That and the chicken fried steak, you can't go wrong." Gerald ordered the meatloaf and Carla headed back to the kitchen. He looked around the diner, taking in the details. Everything seemed right, but something felt off in a way he couldn't quite identify. The other customers were talking, but he couldn't quite hear what they were saying. Not because it was too quiet, but because the words seemed to slip away before his brain could process them, like trying to remember a dream after waking. He looked at the pictures on the walls, vintage cars like he'd noticed. But as he looked closer, the models seemed wrong somehow. They looked like cars from the 1950s and 60s, but with details that didn't match his memory. Hood ornaments in the wrong places. Headlight configurations that didn't exist. Like someone had drawn classic cars from memory without actually knowing what they looked like. The food arrived quickly, steaming hot and smelling delicious. Gerald cut into the meatloaf and took a bite. It tasted perfect, exactly like meatloaf should taste, but there was something strange about the texture, like it was almost but not quite right, the same way artificial grape flavor tastes almost but not quite like actual grapes. He ate anyway, suddenly ravenous, while watching the other customers. They moved normally, lifted forks, drank coffee, gestured while talking. but there was something synchronized about their movements, like they were all following the same rhythm, the same invisible conductor keeping time. Gerald's unease grew. He finished eating quickly, paid Carla at the counter with cash, and headed for the door. As he reached for the handle, he glanced back at the diner. Every customer was looking at him. Not obviously staring, but all of them had turned, all of them had their eyes on him, and all of them had the exact same expression on their faces. Blank, neutral, waiting. He pushed through the door and walked quickly to his truck, skin crawling. Behind him, through the diner windows, he could see the customers had returned to their meals, moving in that same synchronized way, like animatronics in a theme park restaurant. Gerald climbed into his cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot faster than was probably safe. He wanted out of this town, wanted back on the highway, wanted to be away from whatever wrongness he was feeling. He drove back toward the main road, following the signs for the highway entrance. But the street seemed longer than it had been. He passed the same buildings again, the pharmacy, the hardware store, the boutique. Then he passed them again. He was looping, driving down the same 3-block stretch repeatedly, even though he was maintaining steady speed and never turning. Gerald's heart hammered. He tried a different street, turning right at an intersection. This road led past residential homes, neat houses with tidy yards, porch lights glowing. He followed it for several blocks, then turned again, trying to navigate out of the downtown area. But every turn brought him back to the main street, back to the same 3 blocks, back past Maggie's place where customers sat in the windows. All of them turned to watch him drive past. His GPS was useless, showing him still on the highway miles away from any town. His phone had no signal. The truck's clock read 7:43 p.m., the same time it had read when he'd first checked it in the diner. Time wasn't passing. Or it was passing, but the clock wasn't moving, frozen at 7:43 forever. Gerald forced himself to think calmly. He was trapped somehow, caught in this town that shouldn't exist. There had to be a way out. He'd gotten in, which meant there was an exit. He just had to find it. He drove more deliberately now, paying attention to street signs, trying to map the town in his head. But the geography made no sense. Streets that should run parallel intersected each other. Roads that went north ended up heading south. The grid pattern that had seemed so normal and logical from the hilltop revealed itself to be impossible geometry, a maze designed by someone who didn't understand how space worked. After the 10th loop past the diner, Gerald noticed something new. There were more people on the sidewalks now. Dozens of them standing still, all facing the street, all watching him drive past. They didn't wave or gesture. They just stood there, watching, their faces neutral, their postures identical. He tried driving faster, taking turns at random, hoping to break whatever pattern was trapping him. His truck roared through the quiet streets, engine straining. The town blurred around him, buildings stretching and warping like reflections in a funhouse mirror. The people on the sidewalks multiplied, hundreds of them now, thousands, lining every street, all watching, all waiting. Then Gerald saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing in the middle of an intersection ahead was a figure in a trucker's uniform. As he got closer, he could see more details. The uniform was old style, from maybe the 1970s. The man wearing it was middle-aged, weathered, familiar somehow. It was his father. Gerald's father had been a trucker too, had taught Gerald everything he knew about driving. He died 15 years ago, heart attack at a truck stop in Nebraska. Gerald had identified the body himself. But there he stood, solid and real, standing in the intersection in Stillwater, Montana, in a town that didn't exist. The figure raised one hand, beckoning. "Come here, come closer." Gerald's hands moved on the steering wheel without conscious thought, starting to turn toward the figure. Part of his brain screamed at him to stop, that this was wrong, that whatever was happening was trying to trap him permanently. But another part, a deeper part, wanted desperately to drive forward, to reach his father, to somehow reverse 15 years of death and loss. He was 50 feet away, when he saw what was behind his father. More figures, shadowy and indistinct, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, standing in ranks that stretched back into darkness that shouldn't exist in the middle of a lit street. And he understood with sick certainty that these were all the other truckers who'd found this town, all the other drivers who'd been trapped here, lured in by whatever force created Stillwater and kept it existing in its impossible space. Gerald jerked the wheel hard left, refusing the invitation, refusing to join them. His truck jumped a curb, crashed through a wooden fence, and suddenly he was off-road, bouncing across rough ground, scrub brush scraping against his undercarriage. He fought the wheel, keeping the truck moving, crashing through the town's edge. And then he was on the highway again. The transition was instant, jarring. One moment he was crashing through the outskirts of Stillwater, the next he was back on smooth asphalt, white lines stretching ahead, his headlights showing empty road. He looked in his rearview mirror. There was nothing behind him but darkness. No town, no lights, no exit ramp. Gerald pulled over, his whole body shaking. He sat there for a long time, breathing hard, waiting for his heart to slow. When he finally trusted himself to move, he checked his dash clock. It read 7:44 p.m. 1 minute had passed since he'd entered the town, though it had felt like an hour at least. He drove the rest of the way to Great Falls in a daze, delivered his load, and immediately drove back to Missoula without sleeping. In daylight, he retraced his route, looking for any sign of the town. There was nothing. No exit ramp, no valley, just an unbroken stretch of highway through national forest, mile after mile of trees and mountains with nowhere a town could fit. Gerald kept driving professionally for another year, but he never took that route again. He'd request different assignments, take longer paths, anything to avoid that particular stretch of Montana highway. Other truckers sometimes asked him why, and he'd make excuses about preferring different scenery or avoiding rough road conditions. But late at night, when he was alone in his cab with nothing but the road ahead in his thoughts, Gerald would wonder about Stillwater. Was it still there, existing in whatever pocket of reality it occupied? Were there other towns like it, scattered across America's highways, trap doors hidden in plain sight? And how many truckers had disappeared over the years, gone missing without a trace, because they'd taken the wrong exit, entered the wrong town, and never found their way back out? He never found answers to those questions. He just kept driving, kept watching the road, and prayed he'd never see another welcome sign for a town that wasn't on his maps. Story 4. The Static Passenger. Jennifer Wu had been driving long-haul routes for 11 years when she picked up the hitchhiker who wasn't quite human. It happened on Interstate 90 through South Dakota in August of 2023. During one of those oppressive Midwestern heat waves that turned highways into mirages and made the air shimmer like water. Jennifer was hauling refrigerated goods from Minneapolis to Denver, running her usual schedule, keeping her reefer unit humming to keep the cargo frozen despite the brutal exterior temperature. It was 3 in the afternoon, temperature pushing 100 degrees, and the highway was mostly empty, other drivers smart enough to wait for evening cool. She saw the figure on the shoulder about 2 miles out, a dark shape wavering in the heat distortion. As she got closer, she could make out details. A person, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, arm extended with thumb out in the universal sign for hitchhiker. No backpack, no visible luggage, just standing there in the brutal sun with heat waves rising around them like flames. Jennifer's first instinct was to keep driving. She'd been taught never to pick up hitchhikers. Company policy was clear on the subject, and besides it was dangerous, especially for a woman driving alone. But something made her slow down. Maybe it was the heat. Thinking about someone stuck out here in these temperatures with no shade, no water. Maybe it was something else, some compulsion she couldn't quite identify. She pulled over, air brakes hissing, and leaned across to roll down the passenger window. The figure approached, and Jennifer got her first clear look. It was a young man, maybe mid-20s, with bland features that were somehow difficult to focus on. Every time Jennifer tried to really see his face, her eyes would slip away, like trying to look at something in peripheral vision that vanished when you turned toward it. He was smiling, though. She could tell that much, and when he spoke his voice was friendly, normal. "Thanks for stopping. Any chance you're heading west?" "Denver," Jennifer said, still uncertain. "Where are you trying to get to?" "Anywhere west works. I've been stuck here for a while." There was something odd about his appearance beyond the difficulty in focusing on him. His clothes looked clean, unwrinkled, despite what must have been hours in the heat and dust. His skin wasn't sunburned or even particularly sweaty. He looked comfortable, unaffected by the temperature that was making Jennifer's air conditioner work overtime. Against her better judgment, Jennifer unlocked the door. "Climb in. But I've got to tell you, company policy says no passengers. If we get pulled over, you didn't tell me you were riding along." "Understood," the young man said, climbing up into the cab with ease. "I appreciate it." "Really?" Jennifer pulled back onto the highway, checking her mirrors, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd broken a rule, gone against policy and common sense, and she couldn't quite understand why. The young man settled into the passenger seat, looking around the cab with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "Nice setup," he said. "How long have you been driving?" 11 years, Jennifer replied, keeping her eyes on the road. "You?" "I don't drive, I just travel. Been doing that for a long time." Something about the way he said "a long time" made Jennifer glance over at him. His face was still difficult to focus on, features sliding away from her perception, but she got an impression of age that didn't match his apparent youth, like looking at an old photograph that had been retouched to remove wrinkles. "What do you do?" she asked, trying to make normal conversation, trying to convince herself this was fine, just a good deed, helping someone in need. "I observe," he said. "I watch, I listen. That's my job, more or less." Observer for what? He smiled, or she thought he did, it was hard to tell. "That's complicated." "Hey, do you mind if I turn on the radio?" Before Jennifer could answer, the radio came on by itself, tuning to a station that was all static, white noise hissing through the speakers. She reached to change it, but her hand stopped halfway, muscles refusing to obey. The static wasn't quite uniform, she realized. There were patterns in it, rhythms, almost like speech but not quite, like listening to someone talk in a language that didn't use any sounds human vocal cords could make. "Sorry," the hitchhiker said, and the radio turned off. "I forget myself sometimes. It's been a while since I rode with someone." Jennifer's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. "What the hell was that?" "Like I said, complicated. Don't worry about it, just drive. That's all you need to do." They drove in silence for a while, Jennifer's mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to pull over, to make this person get out, but she found herself unable to do it. It wasn't that she was physically prevented, more like the idea of stopping just wouldn't form properly in her mind. Every time she thought about pulling over, the thought would slip away, replaced by a vague sense that everything was fine, just keep driving. "You're frightened," the hitchhiker observed. "I understand. People usually are the ones who can sense what I am." "You're perceptive, Jennifer, that's rare." "How do you know my name? I didn't tell you my name." "I know lots of things. For instance, I know you're thinking about your daughter right now. Sarah, right? She's 7 years old, living with your ex-husband in Portland. You haven't seen her in 3 months because of the custody arrangement and your work schedule." Jennifer's blood ran cold. "How do you know that? Have you been stalking me?" "Nothing so crude. I told you I observe. I know things because knowing things is what I do. I know, for instance, that you're planning to request a route change next month so you can pass through Portland more often. I know that you're worried your daughter is forgetting you. I know that sometimes you cry at rest stops when you think about missing her birthday." "Stop it," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. "Stop talking about her. I'm not trying to upset you. I'm just demonstrating. You picked me up, Jennifer. You chose to stop, to open your door to let me in. Now you get to know what you invited into your cab." The temperature in the truck seemed to drop despite the heat outside. Jennifer could see her breath fogging, impossible in the August heat. The hitchhiker sat perfectly still, and when she glanced at him, she could swear he looked different, taller, his features even less defined, like he was fading out of reality. "What are you?" Jennifer whispered. "I'm a traveler, like I said. I move through your world, observing, collecting data, trying to understand you. Humans are fascinating, you know. So much complexity in such brief lives. You make these decisions, these sacrifices, working yourselves into exhaustion, driving thousands of miles, all for abstract concepts like duty and love. It's beautiful in a way. Tragic but beautiful. You're not human. No, I'm what you might call a researcher. An anthropologist maybe, though that's not quite right either. I study you. I've been studying you for a very long time, riding with truckers, watching how you navigate this world of highways and schedules and loneliness. You're all so isolated, you long-haul drivers, spending days alone with just your thoughts. It makes you sensitive, makes some of you able to perceive things others can't. The static came back on the radio, louder this time, and Jennifer could hear something in it now. Definitely speech, multiple voices talking over each other in languages she didn't recognize. Some of them not sounding like human speech at all. Clicks and whistles and sounds that made her teeth ache. "That's my people," the hitchhiker said conversationally, gesturing at the radio. "Checking in, sharing data. We're all over your planet, have been for a long time. We ride with truckers especially. You go everywhere, see everything, connect all the parts of your civilization. Following you lets us map your world in ways satellites never could." Jennifer wanted to scream, to pull over, to run. But her body wouldn't obey, hands locked on the wheel, foot steady on the gas, maintaining exact speed as mile markers flashed past. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing you weren't already giving, just a ride west. Just some company for a few hours. And maybe, just maybe, someone to remember that we were here." Most people forget immediately, their minds unable to process the encounter. But you're different, Jennifer, you're going to remember. "Let me go," she said, hating how her voice broke. "Please just let me go. I'm not holding you. You can stop any time you want. But you won't, because part of you knows that if you stop, if you acknowledge what's happening, you'll have to accept that your world is much stranger than you thought. That you're not alone on these highways. That there are things using your roads for purposes you can't understand. It's easier to just keep driving, to tell yourself this is a dream or a hallucination brought on by heat and exhaustion." They passed a sign. "Rest area 5 miles." Jennifer felt a surge of hope. If she could just get to the rest area, get out of the truck, be around other people, maybe this thing would leave, would release whatever hold it had on her. "The rest area won't help," the hitchhiker said, reading her thoughts. "But we can stop if you want. I'll be gone soon anyway. My designated pickup point is coming up." "Pickup point?" "Where one of my people will collect me, yes. We maintain stations, places where we transition in and out of your perception. They look like ordinary locations to you, rest stops, diners, gas stations. But they're doors, more or less. Thin places where we can slip between your world and ours." The rest area appeared ahead, a standard highway setup with picnic tables, restrooms, vending machines. Jennifer pulled in, her body finally responding to her commands, and stopped the truck in a parking space. The hitchhiker opened his door. "Thank you for the ride, Jennifer. I'm sorry I frightened you. That wasn't my intention. Well, not my primary intention. We do need to test sometimes to see who can perceive us, who can remember. You're going to be fine. You're going to keep driving, keep working towards seeing your daughter more often. You'll get that route change. You'll make it work." "How do you know?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I've observed you. And because in some small way I've influenced things. Call it a thank you for the ride. Probabilities are flexible if you know how to push them." He climbed down from the cab, and as soon as his feet hit the pavement, Jennifer found she could look at him clearly for the first time. He was ordinary, completely normal looking, just a young man in jeans and a t-shirt. He smiled at her, waved, and walked toward the restrooms. Jennifer watched him go, and then she blinked and he was gone. Not walked away, not moved out of sight. Just gone, vanished between one moment and the next, like he'd never been there at all. She sat in her truck for an hour, shaking, trying to process what had happened. Other travelers came and went, completely normal, going about their business. Eventually, Jennifer started her truck and pulled back onto the highway, continuing toward Denver. The radio worked normally. The temperature returned to the expected August heat. Everything seemed fine, like the encounter had never happened. Jennifer even started to wonder if she'd hallucinated the whole thing, some kind of heat stroke maybe, a waking dream. But 3 weeks later, her company called with a route change. They needed someone to take a regular Minneapolis to Sacramento run that would pass through Portland. Was she interested? The timing was perfect. The schedule would let her see Sarah twice a month instead of once every 3 months. Jennifer took the assignment. And sometimes, late at night on empty highways, she'll turn on her radio and flip through stations, listening to static, wondering if she can hear voices in the white noise, wondering if the things that travel with truckers are still out there, still observing, still riding along with drivers who never quite realize they're carrying passengers. She never picks up hitchhikers anymore, but sometimes she sees them, figures on the roadside in the heat shimmer, thumbs out, patient. She drives past, heart pounding, and in her mirror she swears she can see them smiling, watching her go, adding her refusal to their endless data collection, observers documenting a world they don't belong to, travelers on highways that connect more than just cities. Story 5: The Cargo. Raymond Hayes had been hauling freight for 19 years, and in all that time he'd maintained one simple rule: don't ask questions about the cargo. You pick up the sealed container, you deliver it to the specified location, you get paid. What's inside isn't your business, and knowing can only cause problems. Legal problems, ethical problems, the kind of problems that end careers or worse. That philosophy served Raymond well until October of 2022, when he picked up a container in Baton Rouge that was destined for a facility outside Portland, Oregon. The job came through a broker he'd worked with before, the pay was excellent, and the pickup was routine. A shipping container, standard size, sealed with both regular locks and what looked like some kind of electronic monitoring system. The paperwork described the contents as research materials and specified climate control requirements. Constant 68 degrees, minimal vibration, no stopping except for fuel. Raymond had hauled sensitive cargo before, pharmaceutical research, prototype technology, even artwork. He hooked up the container, programmed his reefer unit for the specified temperature, and headed northwest, planning the route carefully to minimize stops and maximize smooth highway driving. The first day was normal. He made good time through Louisiana and into Texas, stopped once for fuel and food, checked the container seals out of habit. Everything looked fine. The electronic monitoring system displayed a green light, indicating conditions were being maintained properly. Raymond got back on the road and drove through the night, watching the stars through his windshield, listening to old country music on his radio. The second day, crossing into New Mexico, he started hearing the sounds. At first, Raymond thought it was road noise, something in the suspension or a loose part in the trailer. But the sound was too regular, too patterned. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, coming from inside the container. Raymond told himself it was cargo shifting, something settling as they went over bumps. Research materials could be anything: equipment, specimens, chemicals. Maybe something wasn't secured properly and was moving around. But the tapping continued, and it started to sound deliberate, rhythmic, like someone knocking. He pulled into a rest area and climbed out to inspect the container. The electronic system still showed green. The seals were intact. Temperature readings showed exactly 68 degrees. Everything looked perfect. But when Raymond put his ear against the container's metal wall, he could hear something moving inside. Not just moving, walking. Distinct footsteps back and forth, pacing. Raymond's mouth went dry. Research materials don't walk, don't pace, don't tap on walls from the inside. He pulled out his phone to call the broker but stopped himself. Rule number 1, don't ask questions about the cargo. Besides, what would he say? I think your research materials are alive and walking around in there. They'd think he was crazy, or high, or both. He'd lose the contract, probably lose his reputation. He got back in the truck and kept driving, trying to ignore the sounds. But they grew louder as the day wore on. The tapping became knocking, then pounding. The footsteps became more agitated, faster, like whatever was in there was distressed. And sometimes, just barely audible over the engine noise and the sound of tires on asphalt, Raymond could hear something else. Breathing. Heavy, ragged, like someone or something struggling for air. By the third day, crossing into Idaho, Raymond was barely sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes at rest stops, he'd hear the pounding, the footsteps, the breathing. The sounds were constant now, and they seemed to be getting closer somehow, like whatever was in the container was trying to get out, to break through the metal walls that separated it from Raymond's cab. He checked the electronic system obsessively. It still showed green. Temperature, humidity, all parameters within acceptable range. But Raymond noticed something strange. The power consumption had increased. The system was working harder than it should need to for a sealed container in mild weather. Something inside was generating heat, lots of it, and the cooling system was struggling to compensate. On the morning of the fourth day, somewhere in central Oregon, Raymond found scratches on the outside of the container. Long, deep gouges in the metal, running from top to bottom, like something with claws had dragged them from inside to outside, impossible as that seemed. The scratches were fresh, the metal bright where it had been torn, even though the container had been sealed since Baton Rouge and Raymond had been alone with it the entire journey. That's when Raymond broke his rule. He called the broker. "There's something wrong with the cargo," Raymond said without preamble. "It's making noise, moving around. I need to know what I'm hauling." There was a long pause. Then the broker said in a carefully neutral tone, "The cargo is secure, Mr. Hayes. The monitoring system would alert us to any problems. You're scheduled to arrive at the facility in 8 hours. Please maintain course and speed." "You're not listening," Raymond said, his voice rising. "There's something alive in there, something that's trying to get out. I need to know what I'm carrying." "Mr. Hayes, I strongly advise you to follow your contract. Deliver the cargo to the specified location. Do not open the container. Do not deviate from the route. You're being paid very well for this job. Just complete it. And if I don't," another pause, longer this time, "that would be a breach of contract. There would be consequences, legal consequences, possibly worse. The people who hired this transport are very serious, Mr. Hayes. They value discretion and reliability. Please don't make this complicated." The broker hung up. Raymond sat in his truck, hands shaking, staring at the scratched container. He was in too deep. Whatever he was hauling, it was connected to people with resources and reach, people who could make problems for him if he didn't deliver. But he also knew, with growing certainty, that whatever was in that container shouldn't be delivered. That something very wrong was happening, and he was complicit in it. He drove on because he didn't know what else to do. The facility was in the Cascade Range, the address leading him off the main highway onto progressively smaller roads, paved 2-lane giving way to gravel, gravel giving way to dirt. The forest closed in around him, old-growth timber blocking out the afternoon sun, creating premature twilight. The pounding from the container grew frantic. Whatever was inside knew they were approaching their destination, and it didn't want to go. The sounds became almost verbal, not quite words but close, desperate vocalizations that made Raymond's skin crawl. He could hear emotion in them, fear, rage, desperation. The facility appeared without warning, a cleared area in the forest surrounded by high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Security cameras on poles, a guardhouse at the gate, and beyond, low concrete buildings with no windows, industrial and cold, like a prison or a military installation. Raymond pulled up to the gate and a guard stepped out, armed with what looked like a military-grade rifle. The man checked Raymond's paperwork without comment, made a phone call, then waved him through. The gate rolled open with mechanical precision. Inside the compound, personnel in white coveralls waited near a large loading dock. They moved with practiced efficiency, directing Raymond to back his trailer up to the dock. No one spoke to him. No one made eye contact. They attached the container to some kind of mechanical system, then motioned for Raymond to release his trailer. "Wait," Raymond said, climbing down from his cab. "What is this place? What was I hauling?" One of the personnel, a woman with cold eyes, looked at him. "You're done, Mr. Hayes. Your payment has been transferred. There's a turnaround area past Building 3. Please leave immediately. I need to know what was in that container." "No," she said flatly, "you don't, and asking questions will only create problems for you. Your contract included a non-disclosure agreement. Honor it." The container was moving now, hydraulics lifting it off Raymond's trailer, mechanical arms guiding it toward an open bay in the building. Through the bay door, Raymond could see more personnel, medical equipment, containment systems. And he could hear the sounds from the container, louder now, echoing off concrete walls. Pounding, screaming, definitely screaming, voices that sounded almost human but not quite, like someone trying to form words with the wrong vocal anatomy. Raymond stood frozen, watching the container disappear into the building. The bay door started to close, and in the last moment before it sealed, Raymond saw movement inside. A glimpse of something pale and too tall, limbs bent at wrong angles, eyes that caught the light and reflected it like an animal's. Then the door closed, cutting off the sounds, leaving only silence and the hum of generators. "Leave now, Mr. Hayes," the woman said, and there was a threat in her voice that made Raymond's survival instincts kick in. He got in his truck and drove out of the compound, following the dirt road back toward civilization. His trailer felt too light without the container, the truck handling differently, strange. He drove for an hour before pulling over on a highway shoulder, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the steering wheel. He just delivered something to a black site facility in the Oregon wilderness. Something alive, something that had been kept in climate-controlled conditions, something that screamed like it was being tortured. And he'd been paid very well to do it, paid well enough that people would expect him to keep quiet, to forget, to move on to the next job. Raymond sat in his truck until dark, trying to decide what to do. He could report this, call the authorities, tell someone about the facility. But tell them what? That he delivered a sealed container to a location and heard noises. He had no proof, no evidence, and he'd signed NDAs that probably had teeth. The people who ran that facility had resources, connections, the kind of power that could make a trucker disappear without a trace. He drove back to Louisiana, collected his payment, which was indeed substantial, and took a month off work, telling his broker he needed vacation time. He spent those weeks researching, digging through internet forums, conspiracy sites, looking for any mention of facilities in the Oregon Cascades, any hints about what might be happening there. He found nothing concrete, just rumors, whispers, stories from other truckers about strange deliveries to locations that didn't appear on maps, sealed containers with unusual specifications. NDAs, good money, and the universal advice: don't ask questions, don't investigate, just take the money and move on. Raymond eventually went back to work, back to hauling freight across America. But he turned down jobs from that broker, turned down anything that seemed too secretive, too well paid for the actual work involved. He knew he was probably leaving money on the table, but he'd learned something important. Some cargo shouldn't be delivered, some facilities shouldn't exist, and some questions, once you know the answers, will haunt you forever. Late at night, when he's alone in his truck on empty highways, Raymond sometimes hears phantom sounds. Tapping, pounding, screaming. He knows they're not real, just his mind replaying that 4-day journey, but they feel real enough. And sometimes he wonders what happened to whatever was in that container. Is it still in that facility? Is it still alive? And how many other truckers have made similar deliveries? Hauling cargo they don't understand to places they're not supposed to remember. Building a network of secrets that crisscrosses America's highways like a shadow road that only exists for those carrying things that shouldn't see daylight. He doesn't know, he'll never know. And that's probably for the best, because Raymond suspects that the answers would be far worse than the questions, and that some secrets are kept secret not to protect the people who know them, but to protect everyone who doesn't. Story 6. The Mirror Convoy. Thomas Brennan had exactly 14 years behind the wheel when he encountered the convoy that shouldn't exist. It happened on Interstate 80 across Wyoming in January of 2024, during one of those brutal winter storms that turn highways into ice rinks and visibility into a matter of faith rather than sight. Thomas was hauling manufactured goods from Chicago to Salt Lake City, running a tight schedule that didn't leave much room for weather delays. When the storm hit, he should have pulled over, should have waited it out at a truck stop like sensible drivers do. But he was behind schedule, the cargo was time-sensitive, and Thomas had driven through Wyoming winters before. He thought he could handle it. The snow started around noon, light flurries that didn't seem threatening. By 2 p.m., it was a full whiteout, visibility down to maybe 50 feet, wind rocking his truck, snow accumulating on the highway faster than plows could clear it. Thomas slowed to 40 miles per hour, then 30, then 25, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes straining to see the road ahead. That's when he saw the first truck. It appeared out of the snow like a ghost, taillights glowing red through the white curtain. Thomas felt relieved. If another trucker was continuing through the storm, the conditions must not be as bad as they seemed. He fell in behind, maintaining safe following distance, using the other truck's lights as a guide through the blizzard. A few minutes later, a second truck appeared ahead of the first one, then a third, then a fourth. Within 10 minutes, Thomas was following a convoy of maybe a dozen 18-wheelers, all moving at the same careful speed, all maintaining perfect spacing, all heading west through the storm. Thomas grabbed his CB radio. "This is Thomas Brennan. Anyone in the convoy ahead hear me? Over." Silence. Just static, the kind of empty static you get when no one's transmitting. Thomas tried again, switching channels, but every frequency was dead. Not unusual in a storm this heavy. Snow and wind could interfere with CB signals. The convoy continued, and Thomas followed, grateful for the company and the guidance. Following experienced drivers through bad weather was smart trucking, something every veteran knew. The convoy seemed to know the road well, navigating the curves and grade changes with precision despite the terrible visibility. After an hour, Thomas started noticing something strange. The trucks ahead never varied their formation. Exactly the same spacing, exactly the same speed, perfectly synchronized like they were all controlled by the same driver. No one drifted, no one adjusted, no one reacted to the changing wind or the ice patches that made Thomas's truck fishtail occasionally. He tried the CB again. "Convoy ahead, this is Thomas Brennan, do you copy? Over." This time he got an answer. But it was his own voice, his exact words, played back to him with perfect timing. "Convoy ahead, this is Thomas Brennan, do you copy? Over." Thomas felt cold that had nothing to do with the Wyoming winter. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Who is this?" His voice echoed back, same inflection, same tone. He threw the CB handset down, heart racing. This was wrong. Everything about this situation was wrong. The perfect convoy formation, the synchronized movement, the CB echo. Thomas decided to break off, to pull over and let the convoy pass, to get away from whatever strangeness he'd stumbled into. But when he tried to slow down, his truck didn't respond properly. The speed held steady. His foot pressed the brake. He could feel the pedal resisting, but his speed didn't change. He tried harder, standing on the brake pedal, and finally felt the truck start to slow. But as he decelerated, the truck ahead of him slowed too, matching his speed exactly. The whole convoy slowed in perfect synchronization, maintaining the same spacing, the same formation. Thomas's breath came fast and shallow. He tried to steer toward the shoulder to get off the highway entirely. The wheel turned, but sluggishly, like the truck was fighting him. He managed to angle slightly right, and the entire convoy angled right with him, all 12 trucks moving in perfect unison like they were connected by invisible bars. He was trapped. Whatever this convoy was, it had somehow locked him into its formation, into its pattern. He was no longer following, he was part of it, moving with it, unable to break free. The storm intensified, snow so thick Thomas couldn't see anything but the taillights ahead of him. Those red lights became his entire world, glowing through the white like eyes, watching him, keeping him pinned in place. He tried the radio again, tried his cell phone, but everything was dead, no signal, no connection to the outside world. Time became strange. Thomas couldn't tell how long he'd been following the convoy. His dash clock seemed stuck, the numbers not changing, frozen at 3:47 p.m. His GPS was frozen too, showing his location on I-80 but not updating, not moving, like the satellites themselves had stopped tracking him. Then Thomas noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through brief gaps in the snow, he could see the trucks ahead more clearly. They were the same model as his truck, same color, same configuration. And when lightning flashed, illuminating the convoy for a split second, Thomas saw the license plate on the truck directly ahead. It matched his, exactly. He was following himself. The entire convoy was copies of his truck, 12 versions of the same vehicle, driving in formation through the Wyoming storm. Thomas looked in his rearview mirror and saw more trucks behind him, extending back into the storm, all identical, all moving with the same synchronized precision. Panic set in fully now. Thomas grabbed the CB handset again, screaming into it. "What is this? What's happening?" His words echoed back from every truck in the convoy, a dozen versions of his voice overlapping, creating a chorus of fear that filled his cab. The convoy started to accelerate, slowly at first, then faster, speed climbing despite the dangerous conditions. Thomas watched his speedometer rise, 40, 50, 60, 70 miles per hour through blinding snow on an ice-covered highway. His hands gripped the wheel, but it didn't matter. He wasn't controlling the truck anymore, something else was, something that was driving all the trucks as one entity. Through the storm, Thomas saw lights ahead. A bridge or a tunnel or something that looked like a structure spanning the highway. The convoy was heading directly toward it, accelerating still, approaching whatever it was at suicidal speed. Thomas tried the brakes one last time, standing on the pedal with all his weight, but the truck ignored him, engine roaring, snow spraying up from his tires. The structure got closer, and Thomas could see it more clearly now. It wasn't a bridge. It was a kind of gateway, an arch made of what looked like metal but moved like liquid, its surface rippling despite the cold, reflecting the truck headlights in patterns that hurt to look at. The convoy was driving toward it, into it, and Thomas understood with terrible certainty that whatever was on the other side wasn't Wyoming, wasn't anywhere in the world he knew. 20 feet from the gateway, Thomas did the only thing he could think of. He jerked the wheel hard left, harder than before, throwing his entire body weight into it. The wheel fought him, resisting, but Thomas had been driving trucks for 14 years and his muscles had memory that went beyond conscious thought. The wheel turned, more than it should have been able to, and Thomas's truck broke formation, veering left across the center divider. The truck fishtailed wildly on the ice, sliding sideways, tires losing traction. Thomas had a brief glimpse of the convoy continuing forward, all the identical trucks driving into the gateway, disappearing into the rippling surface one after another. Then his truck was spinning, the world rotating around him, metal screaming, and everything went white. Thomas woke up to the sound of a diesel engine idling and someone knocking on his window. He opened his eyes to see a state trooper peering in at him, concern on the officer's face. Thomas was still in his truck, which was sitting at an angle across both lanes of the highway blocking traffic, but the storm had stopped. The sky was clear, late afternoon sun shining weakly through dispersing clouds. "Sir, are you all right?" the trooper called through the window. "You've been sitting here for 20 minutes. Other drivers reported you stopped in the middle of the highway." Thomas rolled down his window, his mind struggling to process. "The convoy," he said. "Did you see the convoy?" "The gateway," the trooper frowned. "There's no convoy, sir. You're alone out here. Have you been drinking? Do you need medical attention?" Thomas looked around. The highway was empty except for his truck and the patrol car. No other vehicles in sight, no tracks in the snow other than his own. The snow itself was only a few inches deep, not the feet of accumulation he remembered from the storm. And when he checked his dash clock, it read 3:52 p.m. 5 minutes had passed since he'd looked at it last, not the hours he'd spent following the convoy. The trooper made Thomas do a sobriety test, which he passed, then called for a tow truck to check his vehicle. Everything was mechanically sound. No damage, no indication he'd been in the spinning crash he clearly remembered. The trooper eventually let him go with a warning about stopping in the middle of highways and a suggestion to get some rest. Thomas drove the remaining distance to Salt Lake City in a daze. He delivered his cargo, collected his payment, and drove straight home instead of picking up a return load. He told his dispatcher he was sick, which wasn't quite true but also wasn't quite false. He was sick in a sense, sick with the knowledge that something had happened to him on that Wyoming highway, something that had left no evidence but had changed something fundamental about how he understood the world. He researched Interstate 80, looking for any reports of unusual phenomena, missing truckers, unexplained accidents. He found more than he expected. Dozens of stories from drivers who'd experienced lost time on that stretch of highway. Reports of mysterious convoys that appeared and disappeared in bad weather. Sightings of structures that weren't on maps, gateways and arches that vanished when approached. Some drivers disappeared entirely, their trucks found abandoned, no sign where they'd gone. Thomas never drove that route again. He specifically requested assignments that avoided Wyoming entirely, willing to take longer routes, less profitable hauls, anything to stay away from Interstate 80. His company thought he was being superstitious, but they accommodated him. Good drivers were hard to find, and if Thomas Brennan had developed a quirk about certain highways, well, that was a small price to pay for his reliability on every other route. But sometimes, late at night, Thomas dreams about the convoy, about driving in perfect formation through endless snow, following himself, chasing his own taillights through storms that never end. And in those dreams, he wonders what would have happened if he hadn't broken formation, if he'd driven through that gateway with all his duplicate selves. Where did those other trucks go? What was on the other side of that rippling arch? And most disturbing of all, somewhere out there, in whatever dimension or reality exists beyond that gateway, is there a version of Thomas Brennan still driving, still trapped in the mirror convoy, following himself through eternal storms on roads that loop forever? He suspects the answer is yes, and he's grateful every single day that it's not him. Story 7, The Call. Michael Torres had been driving cross-country routes for 16 years when his phone rang with a call from his own number. It happened on a Thursday evening in July of 2023, somewhere on Highway 50 through Nevada, that lonely stretch they call the loneliest road in America, because you can drive for hours without seeing another soul. Michael was hauling furniture from California to a warehouse in Ohio, running his usual schedule, the kind of long-haul route that ate up days and miles in equal measure. The sun had set an hour before, leaving Michael driving through the kind of darkness you only get in the desert, where no light pollution dims the stars and the road ahead is just a tunnel carved through absolute black. His phone sat in its dashboard mount, showing the GPS route, occasional notifications, the usual digital companionship of a modern trucker. When it rang, Michael glanced at it automatically, expecting maybe his wife calling to check in or his dispatcher with a routing update. The caller ID showed his own name and his own number. Michael frowned, assuming it was some kind of glitch or spoofing, scammers trying to trick him by faking familiar numbers. He almost didn't answer, but something made him reach out, made him tap the accept button, made him lift the phone to his ear. Hello, silence answered him. Not dead air, not the sound of an empty line, but the specific silence of someone listening, breathing, waiting on the other end. Hello, Michael said again. Who is this? Turn around. The voice was his own, not similar, not sound alike. Exactly his voice, his accent, his inflection. Michael, you need to turn around right now. Go back. Don't drive any further west. Michael's skin crawled. What kind of prank is this? It's not a prank. Listen to me carefully. I'm you calling from 3 hours ahead, from where you're going to be if you don't turn around. Something happens on this highway, Michael. Something bad. You need to trust me. Turn the truck around and take Highway 6 instead. Go south. Avoid the next 50 miles of Highway 50. Michael's first instinct was to hang up, to dismiss this as an elaborate scam or someone playing games. But the voice was too perfect. Every vocal characteristic, every speech pattern, the way he said his own name. It was all exactly right in a way that technology shouldn't be able to replicate. If you're really me, Michael said slowly, then prove it. Tell me something only I would know. Silence for a moment then. Your daughter Emma had surgery when she was 6, appendicitis. You were in Montana when it happened, couldn't get there in time. Your wife Teresa had to handle it alone while you were driving through a snowstorm, crying and praying and feeling like the worst father in the world. You've never told anyone that. Not Teresa, not Emma, no one. You just carry it, the guilt of not being there when your family needed you. Michael's hand started shaking on the wheel. That was true, every word. It was his deepest shame, the memory that woke him up at night sometimes, the moment that made him question whether trucking was worth the sacrifice. And he'd never told anyone. How do you know that? Michael whispered. Because I'm you. Because I remember it the same way you do. And I'm calling to tell you that what's about to happen, what I just experienced, is worse. Turn around, Michael. Please, what happens? Tell me what happens. I can't, or I shouldn't, knowing might make it worse. Just trust me. Take Highway 6. Go around, don't ask questions. Don't drive any further on Highway 50 tonight. The line went dead. Michael sat there, phone in hand, mind reeling. Every logical part of his brain said it was impossible, that time-displaced phone calls weren't real, that someone was playing an incredibly cruel joke using voice synthesis technology that shouldn't exist. But that story about Emma, that moment of guilt and fear and shame, no one knew about that. No one could have known. He checked his phone's call log. The call showed there, listed as coming from his own number, duration 2 minutes and 17 seconds. But when he tried to call it back, he got a message. The number you have dialed cannot be reached. Michael drove on, slower now, watching the road ahead with new wariness. Part of him wanted to follow the advice, to turn around, to take the warning seriously. But part of him needed to know, needed to understand what was happening. And another part, the skeptical trucking veteran part, refused to be spooked by what was probably just an elaborate prank. He passed a sign. Next services 47 miles. Highway 50 stretched ahead, empty and dark. Michael's headlights cut through the night, illuminating sage brush and sand and nothing else. His CB radio was silent. His phone showed no signal now, no bars, just the GPS tracking his position as a blue dot on a lonely line. 30 minutes later, his phone rang again. Same caller ID. Same impossible number. Michael answered immediately this time. I told you to turn around. His own voice, but angry now, frightened. Why are you still driving west? Michael, I'm serious. You're 20 miles from where it happens. You still have time. Find a place to turn around. Go back. I need to know what you're talking about, Michael said. I need to understand. You will understand. In 20 miles you'll understand and you'll wish you hadn't. Please, I'm begging you. I just lived through it. It's not worth it. Turn around. How are you calling me? Michael demanded. How is this possible? I don't know. The same way it's possible for what's about to happen to happen. The rules are different out here, Michael. Highway 50 goes through places that don't follow normal physics. Time gets weird. Cause and effect get tangled. I'm calling you because somehow, where I am, I still have signal and I can reach back to where you are now. But this won't last. The window is closing, please. Where are you? What time is it for you? It's 10:47 p.m. For you, it should be around 7:30. I'm 3 hours and 15 minutes ahead of you. I'm parked at a rest area trying to understand what happened, and I had this thought that maybe I could call my past self, warn you, change it. Maybe that's how I got warned originally. Maybe this is a loop. I don't know. I just know you need to turn around. Michael checked his clock, 7:33 p.m. The math worked out. 15 miles, his voice said from the phone. That's all you have left. 15 miles before you reach the spot. I'm going to try to describe it so maybe you'll recognize it and stop in time. There's a rock formation on the right side of the highway. Looks like a tower or a spire. Just past that, maybe a quarter mile, there's a straightaway, completely flat, perfect visibility. That's where it happens. Where what happens? I can't. Michael, I literally can't tell you. Every time I try to say the words, they won't come out. It's like something won't let me explain. Maybe that's part of it, part of the rules. You have to experience it to know it, and once you experience it, you can't warn others directly. I can tell you to turn around, but I can't tell you why. Please just trust yourself. Trust me. I'm you. I wouldn't lie to you. The desperation in the voice, his voice, was real. Michael could hear it, feel it. This wasn't a prank. Something genuine was happening, something that scared him enough that his future self was calling back through time to try to prevent it. Okay, Michael said quietly. Okay, I'll turn around. There's got to be a crossover coming up or a maintenance road I can use. Thank you. Thank God. Yes, there's a maintenance access in about 3 miles. You can turn around there. Take Highway 6 like I said. It'll add 2 hours to your route, but you'll arrive safe. That's all that matters. What happens to you now? Michael asked. If I turn around, if I avoid this, does that change your timeline? Do you disappear? Silence. Then, I don't know, maybe. Or maybe there are now 2 timelines, one where I experienced it and one where you don't. I don't understand the physics. I just know that if I can save you, save me, from going through what I just went through, then whatever happens to this version of me is worth it. The line went dead again. Michael drove carefully, watching for the maintenance access. His hands were sweating on the wheel despite the air conditioning. Part of him felt ridiculous, running from a threat he couldn't even name, spooked by phone calls that shouldn't be possible. But the fear in his own voice had been real. Whatever waited ahead, his future self was terrified of it. The maintenance access appeared, a break in the median with a chain across it and a sign reading "Authorized Vehicles Only." Michael didn't care. He stopped, got out, moved the chain, drove through, and replaced the chain behind him. Then he headed east, back the way he'd come, looking for the Highway 6 turnoff. As he drove, his phone rang a third time. Same number. Same impossible call. Michael answered, expecting relief, expecting his future self to confirm the change had worked. But the voice that spoke was wrong. It was still his voice, still exactly his voice, but there was something off about the tone, something flat and empty, like listening to a recording that had been processed through a computer. You can't avoid it forever, Michael. Eventually you'll drive that road, tomorrow, next week, next month. It'll wait for you, it's patient. And when you finally do drive past that spot, when you see what's waiting there, you'll understand that running just delays the inevitable. You're going to experience it. You're going to become like me, like us. All the other drivers who have tried to warn their past selves, who have tried to break the loop. You can't escape. You can only postpone. Who are you? Michael demanded, fear spiking. You're not me, not the me who called before. I'm what you become after. I'm the version that stopped fighting, that accepted it. I'm calling to tell you that turning around doesn't help. You'll just have to do this again, and again, and again. Every time you drive Highway 50, you'll get the calls. You'll turn around, and eventually you'll get tired of running and you'll drive straight through. And then you'll become me. calling back to all your previous selves, trying to warn them, knowing it won't work, knowing the loop never ends. Michael hung up, his heart hammered against his ribs. He drove faster, pushing speed limits, desperate to reach Highway 6 to get off Highway 50 entirely. In his mirrors, he saw headlights appear, another truck coming up behind him fast. His phone rang again. He ignored it, letting it ring and ring. But then it answered itself, the speaker turning on automatically, and his own voice filled the cab. "You're only making it worse, Michael. Running makes it last longer. Just turn around, drive west, get it over with, experience what's waiting, join us, stop fighting." Michael grabbed the phone and threw it. It hit the passenger window but didn't break, just bounced onto the seat, still talking, still telling him to give up, to turn around, to drive into whatever horror waited on that straight stretch past the tower-shaped rock. The truck behind him was gaining, closing the distance at impossible speed. Michael pushed his own truck harder, engine straining. The Highway 6 turnoff appeared ahead, and he took it without slowing properly, his trailer fishtailing, tires screaming. The truck behind him blew past, continuing east on Highway 50, and in the split second when it passed under a streetlight, Michael saw the driver. It was him. Exact same face, exact same build, wearing the same clothes he was wearing right now. The driver looked directly at him, made eye contact, and smiled. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness ahead. Michael drove south on Highway 6, shaking so badly he eventually had to pull over. He sat in a rest area for 2 hours, collecting himself, trying to process what had happened. His phone had gone silent. No more calls. The screen showed his call log, listing dozens of incoming calls from his own number, more than the 3 he remembered answering. He eventually continued driving, taking the long way around, reaching Ohio 16 hours behind schedule. He told his dispatcher he'd had mechanical problems, which wasn't quite a lie. Something had definitely broken, though it wasn't his truck. Michael never drove Highway 50 again. He turned down routes that used it, requested alternatives, took longer paths that added days to his trips. His company grumbled but accommodated him. And he never told anyone about the calls, about the warnings from his future self, about the truck driven by his own double that had passed him in the Nevada night. But sometimes his phone rings, caller ID showing his own number, and Michael never answers. He lets it go to voicemail, and when he checks later, there's never a message, just 30 seconds of silence and the sound of wind and static and something that might be breathing or might be interference. And late at night, Michael wonders if somewhere, on some other version of Highway 50, another Michael Tors is driving through the darkness toward whatever waits on that straightaway past the Tower Rock. And he wonders if that Michael is getting calls too, warnings from his own future, and whether that Michael will turn around or drive forward into the experience that creates the loop, that generates the calls, that spreads across time like a virus, infecting every possible version of Michael Tors who might ever drive that cursed stretch of highway. He suspects the answer is that there's no escape, that every version of him eventually experiences it, and that the calls will never stop, because there's always another Michael, another timeline, another chance for his future self to reach back and try to warn him, knowing it won't work, knowing the loop continues forever, knowing that Highway 50 never lets you go once you've driven it, even if you've only driven it in all the timelines where you didn't turn around. All the versions of yourself that made the wrong choice and paid the price, calling back through time to all the yous who haven't yet, begging them to run, knowing they won't listen, knowing the road always wins in the end. Story 8. The Broadcast. Catherine Reed had been hauling freight across America for 18 years when she started receiving the broadcasts. She drove a night shift route, Minneapolis to Seattle and back, carrying various cargo for different companies, always moving in darkness because the pay differential for overnight driving was substantial enough to make the disrupted sleep schedule worthwhile. Catherine had a ritual for the long nights, audiobooks from her phone, classic rock on satellite radio, and during the emptiest hours, scanning through AM radio frequencies, listening to the weird mix of talk shows and late-night radio that populated the overnight airwaves. She found something comforting about AM radio, that vintage sound, voices coming through static from stations hundreds of miles away, bouncing off the ionosphere, a reminder that even in isolated darkness, human voices were out there, talking, connecting. It was on a Tuesday in April of 2024, somewhere in North Dakota at 2:30 in the morning, when Catherine found the station that changed everything. She was scanning through frequencies, static and fragments of speech, when a voice came through clear and strong on 1550 AM. This is the interstate frequency, broadcasting to all drivers currently on the road. If you're hearing this message, you're not alone. There are others, many others, and we need you to understand something important about the highways you're traveling. Catherine's finger paused on the tuning dial. The voice was male, calm, professional, like a public radio announcer. But there was something off about it, something that made her keep listening. The highway system is more than infrastructure, the voice continued. It's a network, yes, but not just for commerce and travel. It's a web, a grid, laid across the landscape in patterns that most people don't recognize. Patterns that have purpose, patterns that have power. Crazy talk, Catherine thought, but she didn't change the station. Something about the voice was compelling, authoritative in a way that made the words sound reasonable even when they clearly weren't. You're part of something larger, the broadcast continued. Every trucker, every driver moving through the night, following routes, maintaining schedules. You think you're independent operators. You think you're making choices. But the routes guide you. The schedules control you. Your vehicle's for something beyond your understanding, carrying cargo that's more than what's listed on your manifests. Catherine frowned. This was sounding less like general conspiracy talk and more like it was directed at her specifically. She checked her radio display. 1550 AM, signal strength strong, but when she looked at the station information, her radio showed no data. No call letters, no location, nothing. Catherine, read, the voice said, and her blood ran cold. You're driving a Peterbilt 579 license plate number, and it recited her actual plate. You're carrying electronics equipment from Minneapolis to a warehouse in Spokane. You've been driving for 7 hours. You're tired. You're thinking about pulling over at the next rest area. Don't keep driving. You need to hear this message in its entirety. Catherine's hands trembled on the steering wheel. This wasn't possible. This was a broadcast, a radio show. It couldn't be personalized. It couldn't know who was listening. But it had said her name, her truck model, her license plate, her cargo, all details that were accurate. You're frightened, the voice said, acknowledging her fear like it could see her. That's understandable. But you need to listen. You need to understand what you've been doing all these years. Every route you've driven, every delivery you've made, it's all been planned. Not by your dispatchers, not by your customers, by something much older, much larger. This is insane, Catherine said out loud, reaching to change the station. Don't touch the dial, the voice commanded sharply. If you change the station now, you'll never hear this frequency again. You'll go back to sleep, metaphorically speaking. You'll keep driving your routes, keep following your schedules, never understanding that you're a component in a system that's been running since the first roads were laid, since the first traders crossed continents with goods on their backs. Catherine's hand froze. She wanted to change the station, wanted to dismiss this as elaborate harassment, maybe something her coworkers set up as a prank. But the voice had a gravity that made her listen. The highway system in America isn't random, the broadcast continued. Look at a map sometime. Really look at it. The way the interstates connect, the patterns they form, the junctions and intersections. It's a symbol, Catherine. A massive sigil carved across an entire continent. And you drivers, you're the energy that powers it. Your movement, your constant circulation, it's like blood flowing through veins, keeping the system alive. Catherine did know the highway maps well, had studied them for years, could visualize the network in her mind. And now that the voice mentioned it, there was something oddly deliberate about the pattern. the way certain highways formed geometric shapes, the way intersections aligned with geographic features. "You're starting to see it," the voice said, like it could read her thoughts. "Good, that's the first step. Now understand this, the cargo you carry isn't just cargo. Every shipment has been planned to move specific items to specific locations at specific times. You think you're delivering electronics. You are, but you're also delivering something else, something that piggybacks on the physical goods. Intent, purpose, energy. Every trucker carries it, unknowing participants in a ritual that's been running for decades." "What ritual?" Catherine asked the empty cab, knowing the radio couldn't hear her. "The binding," the voice answered anyway. "The great working that keeps certain forces contained, certain barriers maintained. The highway system is a containment grid, Catherine. And you truckers, you maintain it through your constant movement, your endless circuits, your devotion to schedules and routes. You're priests of a religion you don't know you practice." This was madness. This had to be someone playing games, trying to scare night shift drivers with creepy broadcasts. But Catherine couldn't change the station, couldn't look away, couldn't stop listening. "You don't believe me," the voice said. "Of course you don't, so let me prove it. In 7 miles you're going to pass mile marker 247. Look to the right side of the highway, you'll see something. Something that proves you're not alone, that the system is real, that everything I'm telling you is true." The broadcast faded to static. Catherine tried to tune back to 1550, but the frequency was dead, just white noise. She checked her GPS. Mile marker 240 was coming up. 7 miles to 247. She should pull over. Should call someone, maybe the police, report harassment or a stalker or something. But who would believe her? A broadcast that knew her name and predicted the future. It sounded absurd even in her own mind. She drove on, watching the mile markers. 241, 242, 243. Her heart rate increased with each one. This was stupid. There wouldn't be anything at mile marker 247. This was just someone playing mind games, trying to freak her out. Catherine's headlights illuminated the road ahead, empty darkness, nothing but asphalt and painted lines. Mile marker 247 appeared in her lights, and she looked right as instructed. A truck was parked on the shoulder. Its hazard lights were on, and someone stood beside it, illuminated in Catherine's headlights as she passed. The person waved at her, a slow, deliberate gesture, and Catherine saw the face clearly for just a moment. It was her face, her exact face. The person standing beside the broken-down truck was Catherine Reed, wearing the same clothes she was wearing right now, waving as she drove past. Catherine screamed, swerving slightly, correcting, heart hammering. She checked her mirrors. The truck was still there, the figure still waving, getting smaller as Catherine accelerated away from it. It couldn't be real. It had to be someone who looked similar, or a trick of light, or her tired mind playing tricks. The radio crackled back to life. "You saw," the voice said, satisfaction in its tone. "Now you understand. There are infinite versions of you, Catherine, infinite versions of every driver, all moving through the network simultaneously. Different timelines, different dimensions, all occupying the same highways. The roads connect more than just cities. They connect possibilities. And sometimes, rarely, the barriers between those possibilities thin and you see through to the other versions of yourself, the other paths you might have taken." "This isn't real," Catherine whispered, but she knew she was lying. She'd seen herself, her exact self, standing beside a truck on a North Dakota highway at 3 in the morning. "It's very real," the broadcast continued. "And now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. You're aware now, Catherine. You're awake in a way most drivers never achieve. You'll start noticing things, coincidences that aren't coincidences, routes that lead you in patterns, cargo that arrives at locations just in time for things to happen, things that seem unrelated but aren't. You're part of the machine now and you know it." "I'll quit," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "I'll stop driving, I'll find another job." The voice laughed, not unkindly. "You can try, but you won't. Because once you've driven the routes long enough, once you've been integrated into the system, you can't leave. The roads call to you. You dream about them. You feel wrong when you're not driving, like a fish out of water, like you're not where you belong. The highways have you, Catherine. They've had you for years. You just didn't know it. Catherine's eyes burned with tears. She wanted to argue, to deny, but the voice was right. She tried to quit before, twice, taken office jobs that paid better and offered stable hours. But something had felt wrong about being stationary. She'd felt restless, anxious, uncomfortable in buildings with fixed addresses. The road had called to her, and she'd answered, returning to trucking both times like she was following an addiction she couldn't name. "What do you want from me?" she asked the radio. "Nothing," the voice said. "I'm not asking you to do anything different. Keep driving your routes. Keep making your deliveries. Just be aware. Be conscious of what you're part of. And when you see the signs, when you notice the patterns, don't be afraid. You're serving a purpose, Catherine, a necessary purpose. The binding must be maintained. The grid must stay active. Without you, without all the drivers who maintain the network through their endless circulation, things would break free. Things that were locked away long ago, things that shouldn't walk the earth." "What things?" "You don't want to know, trust me. Just drive, just keep the system running. That's all any of us can do." The broadcast ended. The radio went to static, and this time when Catherine tried to retune to 1550 AM, there was nothing there, just empty frequency, no signal at all. She drove the rest of the night in silence, too shaken to even listen to music. When she reached Seattle at dawn, she delivered her cargo automatically, her mind elsewhere. Then she started the return trip, driving east into the rising sun, and she started noticing things. The way certain trucks seemed to maintain specific positions on the highway, like they were marking points on a grid. The way certain routes led to junctions that formed geometric patterns when viewed from above. The way her own schedule, when she mapped it out over weeks, created shapes, symbols, designs that had meaning she couldn't quite decipher. Catherine kept driving. She didn't quit. She couldn't. The voice had been right about that. The roads owned her now, or maybe they always had, and she just never recognized it. She was part of something larger, a component in a vast machine that stretched across America, powered by drivers who didn't know they were priests, who didn't know their routes were rituals, who didn't know the cargo they carried was less important than the act of carrying it. Sometimes late at night, Catherine scans through AM frequencies, looking for 1550, looking for the interstate frequency. She's never found it again, but she knows it's out there, broadcasting to other drivers, waking them up, making them aware of the system they serve. And sometimes, on very dark nights on very empty highways, Catherine sees her again, that other version of herself, standing beside a truck, waving. And Catherine waves back, acknowledging the connection, the endless cycle, the loop that all truckers drive without knowing it, maintaining the grid, keeping the binding strong, driving forever through a network that's more than roads, serving purposes they'll never fully understand. Priests of the highway, guardians of the great working, trapped in patterns that were laid before they were born and will continue long after they're gone. Story 9. The Final Mile. Daniel Kowalski had exactly 28 years of experience behind the wheel when he drove his final route. He'd started trucking straight out of high school, 19 years old and hungry for independence, and he'd never looked back. The road had been his life, his home, his purpose. He'd driven every state, hauled every kind of cargo, survived every kind of weather and road condition. In 28 years, he'd accumulated millions of miles, countless deliveries, a reputation as one of the most reliable drivers in the industry. He planned to retire at 50. That was the goal, the finish line he'd been working toward. 50 years old, enough money saved, maybe buy a small place somewhere quiet, spend time with the grandkids he rarely saw. Just one more year. One more year of routes and deliveries, then he'd hang up the keys and step away from the life that had defined him for nearly 3 decades. But in December of 2023, on a run from Denver to Portland, Daniel encountered something that suggested the road might not let him go so easily. It started when his dispatcher called with an unusual request. There was cargo that needed to be delivered to a location in eastern Oregon, off the main route, and the client was willing to pay triple the normal rate for immediate delivery. Daniel would have to deviate significantly from his planned route, add 6 hours to his trip, but the money was exceptional. One delivery, substantial pay, and it would put him that much closer to his retirement goal. Daniel agreed. He'd detoured for premium freight before. Nothing unusual about that. The pickup was at a warehouse on the outskirts of Denver, an industrial area Daniel didn't recognize despite his years of working the region. The building had no company signs, no identifiable markings, just a street number. Inside, workers loaded a single crate into his trailer, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, made of dark wood that looked old, weathered, like it had been sitting in storage for decades. "Handle with care," the supervisor told Daniel, handing him paperwork. "No sharp movements, no sudden stops if you can avoid it. Maintain constant temperature and don't open the trailer until you reach the destination." Standard instructions for fragile cargo. Daniel nodded, checked the seals, secured the load, and pulled out. According to his GPS, the delivery location was a private address in the mountains of eastern Oregon, accessible via a series of county roads off Highway 26. Isolated, but Daniel had made plenty of deliveries to remote locations. Ranches, private estates, research facilities, nothing he hadn't seen before. The first indication something was wrong came 3 hours into the drive, somewhere in rural Wyoming. Daniel's GPS started malfunctioning, the route recalculating repeatedly, the estimated arrival time jumping forward and backward, adding hours then subtracting them, like the device couldn't decide how far away the destination was. Then his odometer started acting strange. The mileage counter was increasing too fast, clicking over miles more quickly than it should. Daniel watched it carefully. At 60 miles per hour, the odometer should increase by 1 mile per minute. But his counter was gaining miles at maybe twice that rate, like he was traveling faster than his speedometer indicated, or like distance itself was compressing. Daniel tried his CB radio. Static, tried his phone, no signal. He was alone on the highway, no other vehicles in sight, driving through winter darkness with malfunctioning instruments and cargo that was starting to make him nervous. He pulled over to check the trailer. Everything looked secure. The crate was still strapped down properly, no shifting, no damage. But when Daniel put his hand on the trailer wall near the crate, he felt vibration. Not the vibration of the idling engine or passing traffic, something rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat. Daniel got back in his cab, deeply uncomfortable now, but committed to finishing the delivery. Triple rate meant he needed to follow through, and he'd never failed to complete a job in 28 years. He wasn't about to start now, even if the cargo was giving him bad feelings. The drive continued through the night. The roads became progressively more isolated, smaller, poorly maintained. Daniel passed through tiny towns that looked abandoned, buildings dark, streets empty. His fuel gauge was behaving oddly too, dropping faster than it should, then rising slightly, then dropping again, like the truck was consuming and somehow regenerating diesel. The GPS led him off Highway 26 onto a county road, then onto a smaller road, then onto what was barely more than a dirt track winding through dense forest. Daniel's headlights caught trees pressing close on both sides, branches scraping against his trailer. This was wrong. You couldn't drive an 18-wheeler through terrain like this. But somehow the track was just barely wide enough, like it had been designed specifically to accommodate a truck, carved through the forest with precision that seemed deliberate. After 20 miles of this impossible road, Daniel saw lights ahead. A clearing, buildings, what looked like a small compound surrounded by high fences. The gates opened automatically as he approached, like they'd been expecting him, watching him approach. Daniel pulled into the compound and killed his engine. A man emerged from the largest building, elderly, wearing a suit that looked too formal for this rural location. He walked to Daniel's truck, moving with purpose. "Mr. Kowalski," the man said, knowing his name without introduction. "Thank you for the delivery, you made excellent time." "What is this place?" Daniel asked, climbing down from his cab. "And what am I carrying?" "This is the end of the route," the man said cryptically. "And you're carrying something that needs to be here, something that's been traveling for a very long time." Workers appeared, moving efficiently to unload the crate. They handled it carefully, almost reverently, carrying it toward the main building. Daniel watched them go, feeling like he should say something, should demand answers, but finding himself strangely passive, going through motions he couldn't quite control. The elderly man handed Daniel an envelope. "Your payment, plus a substantial bonus. You've been an excellent driver, Mr. Kowalski. 28 years of perfect service." "How do you know how long I've been driving?" "We know all the drivers. We track them, monitor their routes, their dedication, their reliability. When someone reaches a certain threshold, demonstrates a certain level of commitment to the road, they're chosen for special deliveries. Final deliveries, you might say." Something cold settled in Daniel's stomach. "Final? You were planning to retire," the man said, and it wasn't a question. "One more year, you told yourself. 50 years old, time to step away, time to stop driving. But the road doesn't let go easily, Mr. Kowalski. Once you've given it enough of your life, enough of your time, it owns you. And it requires payment for that ownership." "What are you talking about?" The man gestured toward the building where the workers had taken the crate. "Every driver who reaches your level, who dedicates decades to the routes, eventually makes this delivery. They bring cargo to places like this, facilities scattered across the country, endpoints in a network that's been running for longer than you can imagine. And when they deliver that cargo, they pay the toll." "I'm not paying anything," Daniel said, backing toward his truck. "I'm leaving, I delivered your cargo, I'm done." "You can't leave, Mr. Kowalski, look at your truck." Daniel turned. His Peterbilt was different. The paint was faded, rust spreading across the hood, tires flat and rotted. It looked like it had been sitting here for years, decades, slowly deteriorating. He touched the door handle and it crumbled under his fingers, metal corroding instantly. "What's happening?" Daniel whispered. "The miles are catching up," the man said quietly. "All those miles you drove, all those hours on the road, all that time you gave to the highway. Time is a debt, Mr. Kowalski, and eventually it gets collected. You've been driving on borrowed time for years now, staying younger than you should be, aging slower because the road sustained you, kept you going. But now at the end point the debt comes due." Daniel looked at his hands. They were changing, aging rapidly, skin wrinkling, spots appearing. He could feel it in his joints, his muscles, decades of wear compressing into moments. He'd been 50 years old that morning. Now he felt 70, 80, the years flooding into him all at once. "No," he managed to say, falling to his knees. "This isn't possible." "It's the price," the man said, not unkindly. "Every dedicated driver pays it eventually. The road gives you years of strength, years of health, lets you drive when you should be too old, too tired. But at the end, it takes back what it gave, plus interest. Some drivers figure it out before they reach the threshold. They quit early, retire at 30 or 40, break free before they're too committed. But you drove for 28 years, Mr. Kowalski. You passed the point of no return long ago." Daniel's vision was fading, his body failing. He could feel his heart struggling, his lungs laboring. He was dying, aging a lifetime in minutes, paying back all the borrowed time the road had given him. "The cargo," he gasped. "What was in the crate?" "You," the man said simply. "What's in every crate delivered here?" The essence of a driver, their dedication crystallized, their life force extracted through years of service. "We collect them, store them, use them to power the network, to keep the highways alive. You've been feeding the road for decades, Mr. Kowalski. Now it's time for the road to fully consume what you've been giving it." Daniel collapsed, his body ancient, used up. The last thing he saw was workers emerging from the building, carrying another crate, loading it onto a truck that hadn't been there moments before. The truck pulled away, heading back down the impossible road, carrying cargo to another destination, another driver making their final delivery. The elderly man stood over Daniel's body, now almost skeletal, aged far beyond natural years. "Rest well, driver," he said quietly. "You served faithfully. The road appreciates your sacrifice. Others will follow, they always do. The highways need constant feeding, and there are always dedicated drivers willing to give their lives, mile by mile, year by year, never realizing they're paying in installments for a debt that comes due all at once." He turned away, leaving Daniel's remains to turn to dust in the Oregon night. Inside the compound, the crate was being processed, the life force inside it extracted, refined, distributed through the network, feeding the vast system of highways that crisscrossed America, keeping them alive, keeping them hungry, ensuring they would call to other drivers, other devoted souls who would spend decades behind the wheel, thinking they were working toward retirement, toward freedom, never understanding that every mile drove them closer to the final delivery, the last route, the endpoint where all dedicated drivers eventually arrived, paying the toll that the road had always intended to collect. Somewhere in Denver, a young driver was picking up his first long-haul route, excited about the freedom of the road, the independence, the adventure. And he couldn't know, that with every mile he drove, he was signing a contract written in asphalt and diesel, agreeing to terms he didn't understand, committing to a debt that would be collected in time, one way or another, because the road never lets go of drivers who love it too much, who give it too many years, who fail to recognize that highways are alive in ways most people never understand, and that alive things need to feed, and that some payments can only be made in lifetimes, consumed mile by mile, delivered at last to facilities hidden in forests and mountains, where dedicated drivers make their final deliveries and pay the price for decades of service, leaving nothing behind but empty trucks and dust and new cargo ready to be hauled by the next generation of drivers who don't yet know they're already committed to the same fate, the same final mile, the same ending that waits at the terminus of every route that's driven too long, too far, with too much dedication to a road that accepts all offerings and returns nothing but the illusion of freedom and the promise of a debt that will, inevitably, eventually, always come due.